Build a private wealth standard before lifestyle upgrades decide for you. Wealth gets easier only after you replace public proof with a private financial standard. A lot of adults are not financially stuck because they are irresponsible. They are stuck because they are keeping score on the wrong board. They measure progress by visible upgrades, income labels, and family approval, instead of take-home reality, automatic investing, fixed cost control, and resilience. The real upgrade is not looking richer. It is becoming harder to destabilize. Calm, precise. Mature. Systems first. Speaking to viewers who are trying to build something real while living inside social environments that reward visible proof. There is a kind of financial mistake that does not feel like a mistake while you are making it. It feels normal. It feels adult. It feels like exactly what a person at your stage is supposed to do. It even feels responsible because everyone around you understands it instantly. You take the nicer apartment because now you earn enough to deserve it. You take the newer car because it matches where you are in life. You let spending rise because the people around you are rising too. You let the raise make everything a little more polished. And when family or friends see the upgrade and approve, the decision feels settled. That last part is the part that matters, not the purchase, the confirmation. The small social signal that says, yes, this looks right. This looks successful. This looks like progress. But a lot of people are quietly discovering that visible progress and durable progress are not the same thing. Someone can look upgraded and still feel cornered. Someone can earn more and still feel fragile. Someone can be admired for the life they are displaying while privately knowing that one repair, one rent increase, one school bill, one bad month would put the whole system under strain. And at the same time, someone else can look almost unchanged from the outside. Same car, same neighborhood, same ordinary week. No visible leap in status. And yet, that second person is getting financially stronger every single month. Why? Because one of them is still using public proof as the scoreboard. The other one has quietly switched to a private standard. That switch is what this episode is about. The moment adulthood gets financially easier, not because you found the perfect budget, but because you stopped outsourcing your decisions to what looks normal and started running your money by your own rules. Rules about take-home income. Rules about where raises go. Rules about how much of your life is allowed to become fixed. Rules about what counts as progress, even when nobody can see it. That shift sounds small. It is not small. It changes almost everything downstream of it, because once you build a private wealth standard, your money decisions stop asking, will this look reasonable for someone like me? They start asking, does this actually strengthen my position? That is a harder question. It is also a far more useful one. Wealth gets easier only after you replace public proof with a private financial standard. Most financial drift starts as a scoreboard problem. People think they are making spending decisions. A lot of the time, they are making identity decisions. They are quietly answering questions like, what does someone at my income drive? What does someone my age rent? What do responsible parents spend on? What does a successful couple's life look like? What does my family recognize as having made it? Notice what every one of those questions has in common. They are public questions. They are about how your life reads from the outside. They are about lining up with a social script, and the script is powerful for a real reason. Human beings are social. We want our lives to make sense to the people around us. We want our effort to be legible. We want proof. The problem is that proof is a terrible operating system for durability. A new car proves something. An investment contribution proves almost nothing to anyone watching. A bigger kitchen proves something. A deeper cash buffer proves nothing. A photographed vacation proves something. A lower fixed cost load proves nothing. So the world naturally over-rewards the decisions that can be seen and under-rewards the decisions that quietly improve your position. This is how adults drift into expensive lives without one dramatic failure of judgment. They are not reckless. They are readable. Every choice makes sense to the public scoreboard. The trouble is that the public scoreboard was never measuring durability. It was measuring visibility. That is why a person can collect more social approval while becoming financially weaker. The lease looks current. The wardrobe looks upgraded. The neighborhood looks better. The holidays look nicer. The life looks like it is moving forward. Meanwhile, the private structure underneath is getting thinner. Less slack. Less optionality. More fixed commitments. More dependence on the next paycheck arriving exactly on time. More dependence on nothing going wrong. That is not wealth. That is fragility with good lighting. A private wealth standard begins the moment you decide that public proof is no longer the final judge. Not because status never matters, not because comfort never matters, but because none of it is allowed to outrank the real condition of your finances. You need a private scoreboard that asks different questions. How much of what I earn do I actually keep? How much of my month is already spoken for before I begin? How much of my life depends on everything going right? How many bad surprises can I absorb without debt, panic, or damage control? Are my raises buying freedom or just funding a more expensive version of the same life? Those are private questions. They produce no applause, but they tell the truth, and durability is built out of the truth. The first rule of a private wealth standard is simple to say and hard to live. Stop building your identity around gross income. Start building your decisions around take-home reality. This sounds obvious until you notice how many people do the exact opposite. They say, I make $150, or we bring in $200, or I'm finally in that bracket now. But the money you earn on paper and the money you can actually run your life with are not the same number. Taxes take a share. Benefits take a share. Retirement withholding takes a share. Health coverage takes a share. Commuting, childcare, and everyday friction take more. And then something more dangerous happens. Your visible life starts responding to the big gross number before your private system has adapted to the smaller real one. That gap is where the feeling of, we make good money, so why is it still tight, almost always lives. Because the headline income wrote you a psychological permission slip. The apartment moved first, the car moved next. The convenience spending drifted up right behind them, and now the household is living by a gross income identity while operating inside a take-home reality that cannot comfortably carry it. A private wealth standard refuses to play that game. I do not care what the salary sounds like until I know what reaches the operating account. I do not care what the title implies until I know what the month can safely hold. I do not care whether something looks reasonable for my bracket until I know what it does to my margin. That last word is the one that matters. Margin. Margin is what gives money its emotional stability. Without margin, even a strong income feels brittle. With margin, an ordinary income can feel surprisingly solid. That is why two households earning nearly the same amount can have completely different financial experiences. One is treating income as a status identity. The other is treating take-home cash flow as an operating fact. The first household says, people like us can afford this. The second asks, what does this do to our monthly flexibility? That second question is the real beginning of financial adulthood, not the first big paycheck, not the first upgrade. The first time, you are more loyal to your private math than to your public identity. And once that loyalty flips, tempting decisions start to look different. A luxury that felt earned starts to look like a fixed obligation. A nicer lease starts to look like a long, slow compression of your options. A payment that seemed manageable starts to look like a monthly tax on your future freedom. Take-home reality is not pessimism. It is clarity. It tells you what your life actually costs. And until you are willing to live by that number, you do not have a private wealth standard yet. You have a public income story. The second rule is that raises have to be assigned a job before they get socially absorbed. A lot of people believe the next raise is the one that finally makes everything easier. Sometimes it does. Very often, it just makes a more expensive version of the same life feel normal. That happens because raises do not arrive into empty space.
They arrive into a system that already has habits, expectations, and pressures waiting for them. The rent can rise, the neighborhood standard can rise, the travel standard can rise. The gift standard can rise. The amount of friction you will pay to avoid can rise. And it can all happen slowly enough that you experience it as progress instead of drift. This is why a private wealth standard needs race allocation rules, not vague intentions, rules. For example, a set share of every raise goes straight to investing. A set share goes to cash reserves until the buffer target is met. Only a defined portion is even available for lifestyle. And even that portion still has to survive the fixed cost test. Why insist on rules?
Because a raise without a rule instantly becomes a negotiation with your emotions, your peers, your fatigue, and your sense of what is overdue. That is a weak environment for a good decision.
The moment the raise lands, life starts producing reasons that every extra dollar is already spoken for. You work hard. You deserve some comfort. Everyone at this level does this. This would make the week easier. This would help the kids. This would make you feel less behind. Some of those reasons are even true. That is exactly what makes this hard. The danger is not that every need is fake. The danger is ungoverned need. A private standard does not ban upgrades. It sequences them. It says, first, the system gets stronger. Then, if margin still exists, the lifestyle can expand. That order matters more than people realize. Because if the system does not strengthen first, the raise goes invisible almost immediately. You have more income on paper, but the texture of your life barely changes. And sometimes it gets worse because the life around the raise hardens into a higher baseline you now have to maintain. Now the income has to defend a more expensive normal. Now a job change is scarier. Now a slow month is scarier. Now mistakes cost more. Now the appearance itself has to be kept up. This is how bigger earnings quietly fail to create bigger freedom. They arrive without a private standard, and they get drafted into public proof. A raise should not just make your life look upgraded, it should make your life harder to corner. If it does not do that, the raise was consumed socially before it was ever useful structurally. That is not a small miss. It is one of the main reasons adults stay well paid and financially tense at the same time. The third rule is emotional, which is exactly why it gets neglected. A private wealth standard requires you to tolerate invisible progress. That sounds easy when you say it fast. It is not easy at all. Visible progress pays you back immediately. People notice the car. They notice the trip. They notice the house. They notice the nicer version of your life. There is recognition. There is a story. There is evidence. Invisible progress is silent. Nobody sees the automatic transfer. Nobody claps because your fixed costs held flat this year. Nobody texts you to celebrate that you did not inflate your life after the raise. Nobody admires you for keeping your options open. And in some families and communities, invisible progress is not just unnoticed, it is misread. You can be steadily building a stronger position and still be treated like the one who has not arrived yet. Because from the outside, you have not produced the symbols people are trained to read. No new truck, no bigger house, no visible jump in consumption. Nothing cinematic. This is where people get pulled off course. Not by greed exactly, by social hunger. By the ordinary human wish to have your effort recognized. By the fatigue of being privately disciplined while publicly ordinary. A private wealth standard has to plan for that. It has to admit up front, some of your best financial decisions will feel emotionally unrewarding for a long time. Some will look boring. Some will make you seem overly cautious. Some will land in moments when everyone else's life looks more exciting, more finished, more impressive than yours. That does not mean your standard is wrong. It means your standard is measuring something the room cannot see. And this is where the most underrated wealth skill shows up. Low status stability. Low status stability means choosing the option that does not maximize admiration, but does maximize control. Keeping the paid-off car.
delaying the bigger home. Declining the upgrade that would eat your flexibility. Letting your life look less optimized than it could be while your systems quietly get stronger. That is not falling behind. That is strategy. The culture tends to treat visible sacrifice and visible success as the meaningful things, and quiet system building as nothing much. But wealth is mostly built in the quiet part, the automated part, the repetitive part. The part with no cinematic payoff and nothing to announce at dinner. If your self-respect depends on public proof, this phase is brutal to survive. If your self-respect can attach to private discipline, the whole game changes. Now the reward is not being seen as upgraded. The reward is knowing your life has more room in it than it did before. More room to wait, more room to say no. More room to recover, more room to choose. That is what invisible progress is actually buying, not applause. Space. The fourth rule is that a private wealth standard has to police fixed costs with almost uncomfortable honesty, because fixed costs are what turn good incomes into fragile systems. A lot of people assume their spending problem is variable. Too many dinners out, too much shopping, too much impulse. Sometimes that is true, but the deeper problem in most adult households is fixed cost scaling. Housing rises, vehicles rise, insurance rises, schooling rises, subscriptions pile up. Services that used to be occasional become permanent. The baseline hardens, and once the baseline hardens, income starts arriving pre-committed. That is the point where people earn what sounds like a comfortable number, while privately experiencing their life as something they have to defend every month. This is one reason high earners can still feel poor. Not because the paycheck is fake, because the structure built around the paycheck expanded too aggressively. A private wealth standard watches that expansion closely. It asks, how much of next month is already gone before I start? How many of my comforts are actually obligations in disguise? If my income dropped, or my energy dropped, or one bill came early, which parts of this life would turn stressful immediately? Those are not anxious questions. They are stabilizing questions. They keep you from confusing a beautiful setup with a resilient one. This is why fixed cost ceilings matter. Every serious adult should know the maximum level of recurring obligation their system can carry before it turns brittle. Without that ceiling, upgrades arrive one at a time until the whole structure changes without your consent. A nicer rent here, a bigger payment there, a few convenience layers on top. A little more paid help, a handful of recurring comforts that each made sense on their own. Then one day, the household is not flexible anymore. It is fully committed to maintaining itself. It costs real money just to stay the version of life you have already built. That is the hidden danger of lifestyle maturity. Most adults are not trapped by one reckless decision. They are trapped by a collection of reasonable decisions that were never governed by a private standard. A fixed cost trap is dangerous because it converts aspiration into pressure. Now the income is not building wealth. It is protecting the image of the current life. That is a completely different job, and a much smaller one. It is very hard to get rich while your cash flow is fully assigned to maintenance. So the private standard has to be willing to say no, even when yes would look completely normal. Not because normal is evil, because normal is usually more expensive and more fragile than people are willing to admit. So what does a real private wealth standard actually look like? Not as a slogan, as a practical operating system you could run starting this month. Here is a clean version. First, anchor everything to take-home income, not gross identity. Build your life around what truly lands in the account, not what sounds impressive in conversation. Second, set an investing floor. Not a wish, a floor. A minimum contribution that happens automatically and is treated as a fixed part of adult life, like rent. You can raise it later. The point is that it exists before any upgrade gets to negotiate for the money. Third, write a raise allocation rule. Every pay increase gets a destination before it arrives. Some to investing, some to reserves. Only some to lifestyle. Without this, the raise becomes emotionally available to everything at once. Fourth, define a fixed cost ceiling. Decide how much of your monthly take-home you are willing to lock into recurring obligations and refuse to cross it. That ceiling is one of the most protective numbers in your whole financial life. Fifth, keep a cash buffer big enough to change the tone of your month. Not because emergency funds are morally superior, but because cash changes the speed and quality of your decisions. With a buffer, you can wait, compare, think, and recover. Without one, urgency sets the price of everything. Sixth, make upgrades prove themselves before they are allowed in. Before you take on a new recurring cost, ask what freedom it removes, what pressure it adds, and how it behaves if income falls or priorities change. An upgrade that quietly destroys flexibility is not automatically a good upgrade, no matter how normal it looks. Seventh, treat low-status stability as an asset, not a compromise. A less impressive car, a slower move, a more boring spending profile. These can be buying something genuinely valuable, control. Do not confuse control with deprivation. Eighth, expect to be misread. People may think you are behind while you are compounding. They may think your life has stalled while your structure is getting stronger. That is part of the cost of using a private scoreboard inside a public world. Plan for it instead of being surprised by it. And finally, define progress in private terms. A lower ratio of obligations to take-home pay. A stronger, more automatic investing habit. A deeper cash reserve. A household that can absorb more without drama. A life that no longer needs every single month to go perfectly. That is progress. It may not photograph well, it may not get admired right away, but it is the kind of progress that survives contact with the real world. The real danger in personal finance is not only overspending. It is letting the culture around you set your standards before you do. If you do not build a private wealth standard, one gets built for you, by your neighborhood, by your peer group, by your family's idea of what adulthood is supposed to look like, by your industry, by convenience, by exhaustion, by the constant pressure to make your progress visible. And once that happens, lifestyle upgrades start deciding for you. Not because they are always wrong, but because they arrive before your rules do. That is the thing this episode is trying to interrupt. You do not have to become anti-comfort. You do not have to become anti-status. You do not have to wear austerity as a personality. You just need a standard that is private enough to tell you the truth. A standard that says, my life is built on take-home reality. My raises have jobs. My fixed costs have limits. My progress does not need to be visible to be real. And my goal is not to look upgraded before I am secure. My goal is to become harder to destabilize. That is when wealth starts to feel different. Not bigger at first. Cleaner. Calmer. Less theatrical. Less dependent on proof. And eventually, that private standard builds the one thing public proof never can. A life that is genuinely hard to shake. A life with room in it. A life where the decisions get made from strength instead of from display. That is the real luxury. Not the upgrade everyone notices. The quiet system that keeps you free.